Well, hello. Merry Christmas. That was a very weak Merry Christmas. I need it better. Merry Christmas. That sounds a little bit better to me. There's a Christian scholar named G.K. Chesterton, a great Christian thinker, and he said, the best way to shorten winter is to prolong Christmas. That's my theory I'm working with, so I'm doing Merry Christmas as long as I can into January. I'm keeping my lights up to February. I'm not. My wife would kill me. I can't do that. So, well, welcome. It's so good to be with you all today. I'm excited to be back with you. It feel like familiar friends to me, and excited to hear all that God is doing here in your church in this season, and the good work God is doing through you and your community, and just excited to be here with you guys and witness to that, and then to speak into that. And so you guys are in this series called God With Us, where you're looking during this Christmas season at the different ways that we can experience and see how God can be with us. And this comes from the promise way back in the Old Testament that's repeated in the New Testament. In Matthew chapter 1, verse 23, it says this: "The virgin will conceive and give birth to a son, and they will call him Emmanuel." And as you might know, that word Emmanuel means God is with us. And so you're looking at these different ways in this Christmas season that we can encounter God, how we can experience God with us in different seasons of life. And last week, I know you talked about how we often want to experience God in mountaintops. Anyone like mountaintop experiences? Yeah? I think there are very few people in life who are like, yeah, I just really like it when it's hard all the time, right? Like most of us want, desire, seek out these mountaintop experiences, but the reality is God has experienced and his presence is with us in so many other places. So last week you looked at how God is with you in the valleys of life, in the valleys of life. Today, I want to talk about another place that we see over and over in the scriptures where God is with us, where we can experience Emmanuel, and that is the wilderness. The wilderness. Before I say anything else, I just want to put out a resource to you. There's a great resource, if you're not familiar with it, called The Bible Project. And they have some amazing podcasts where they've been exploring now for a couple months the theme of the wilderness in the Bible. So if this piques your interest and you want to know more, I would encourage you to go to that podcast and listen to that or watch their videos. Really, really good stuff there. Really biblically sound kind of things. But when we talk about the wilderness is different from a valley. Let me explain why. When you are in a valley, you can see your way out. You're down low, and you can see, if I can just get up there, then I know that this will end. Then I know that there is a way to get out of this thing. Like you can see a pathway when you're in the valley because you can see the mountaintop. Or maybe you've just come down from the mountain, and so you know, like, okay, I know God is there. I know He's with me. If I can just get back there again, sometimes that hope is what keeps you going in a valley. But wilderness is different. Wilderness feels a lot more disorienting. Wilderness feels like I don't know which way to go. I feel lost in this. I feel like I'm not sure, should I go this way or should I go that way? And oftentimes periods of wilderness feel like there's an intense time of testing surrounding that. And it also feels like sometimes wilderness seasons of our life, if you go through the scriptures even, they're often prolonged periods. They're not a day. It's not just like, man, I was in the tank today, but then tomorrow I woke up and I felt better. But wilderness is often prolonged periods of time where it feels like, man, I can't get out of this. I was thinking about this when I was a kid. I was about, 10 or 11 years old, and I grew up in a family that did a lot of hunting. And so I'd gone deer hunting with my dad since I was really little. And when I was about 10 or 11, my dad said, okay, I think you're ready to go off on your own now. So I had a friend with me. We were out east on the East Coast. My family owns a farm out there. And so my dad, I'd hunted on this family farm plenty of times. And he was like, I think you're good. So he sent me out with my buddy, dropped me off in a place in the woods and says, okay, now you can find your place to where you're going hunting. It's a pretty large piece of property. So he dropped me and my buddy off. We realized in that moment, neither one of us had a flashlight or like a little headlamp or anything like that. And I don't know if you've ever been in the woods at night. It's dark. It's really, really dark. And it was really early in the morning because if you don't know, when you deer hunt, you start out usually before the sun comes up, at least a half hour, if not an hour before the sun comes up. And so me and my buddy are like here, and all of a sudden, my dad is nowhere to be found. We're in utter darkness in the woods in this giant piece of land, and nothing looks the same. Have you ever experienced that? Things look different in the daylight than they do at nighttime? Well, that's what it was for me. And I was like, I don't know where I'm supposed to go. And so we're just literally wandering around, bumping into trees at night, not being able to see anything. And I'm like starting to panic. Even though I know I'm like really not that far from my house. The property really wasn't that big, but it felt like I'm going to live here now. Like, this is my home. We're going to have to forage for food. Like, I was like, well, at least we have a way we can shoot something if we need to, but we like couldn't. So we're running around the woods going, hey, don't shoot us. Hey, we're literally shouting this in the woods. We are never going to see a deer because we were afraid we were going to get shot as we're walking. So the only thing I knew to do was just to keep walking and look for a light. And then once I saw that light, then to follow that light until we got out of the wilderness. And wilderness often feels like that. Disorienting, it's upside down. Even if it's not something so heavy and serious, it feels like it is. It feels like it's never going to end. It feels like it's going to last forever. And you're like, all you can do is just hold on to one little thing to help you get through that. Wilderness seasons are a lot like that. So the question we want to ask today is, how do we experience God in wilderness? How do we know that God is with us like the scriptures promised? What's interesting to me is that as we look in the scriptures and we see different wilderness stories, they often come right after mountaintop experiences. So you'll see this trend as you look through the Bible, that often there's this great and wonderful thing that it's some experience that God's people have, and it's followed by entering into a wilderness. So one example of this, Jesus. He emerges into public ministry around in his early 30s or late 20s. He goes to get baptized by his cousin, John the Baptist. He goes down into the water. He comes back up, and the voice from heaven speaks, "This is my son who I love and in whom I'm well pleased." It is an absolute mountaintop moment. This is the declaration from the Father, the Son, about the Son in the Spirit, that this is the Messiah. He's the one that's promised. It is an absolute mountain experience. And in the Gospels, it says the very next thing that happens is Jesus is led by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tested for 40 days. Do you see that? So it's interesting, this mountaintop experience, this great, wonderful experience Jesus has of affirmation from his heavenly Father, where people get to see who he is immediately followed by this wilderness now where he's tempted for 40 days. And here's the big idea. I want to come back to an idea over and over again. It's really one simple thing that I want to try to just drill home today about the wilderness. In the wilderness, we experience often our deepest need. And your deepest need becomes a gift when it drives you to depend on God. Your deepest need can become a gift to you when it drives you to depend on God. And wilderness is the place where our deepest needs are exposed. And I want to do this today by looking at an episode in 1 Kings, where the prophet Elijah finds himself in a wilderness kind of experience. So let me give you a little bit of the backstory before we go into the story here. Elijah was a prophet. He was one of the people who spoke on behalf of God to God's people, calling them back to loyalty. Come back home to me, Elijah would have called the people. The people were worshiping foreign gods. They were led by an evil king. That evil king had misled his people and allowed them to worship people. This king Ahab was leading people astray from God. And so we have this epic kind of showdown that happens in the book of 1 Kings. Many of you will be familiar with the story. There are the prophets of Baal or Baal, these people who are worshiping this foreign god, and God's people are joining in that worship of these foreign gods. And so these prophets decide they end up having the showdown with Elijah. And Elijah basically says, hey, let's let's prove who the real God is here. Let's see whose God is more powerful. He's like, here's the deal. I want you guys to prepare a sacrifice, prepare an animal for sacrifice, but don't light it on fire. And then I will do the same. I'll prepare a sacrifice and I won't light it on fire. And you guys pray, go ahead and pray and see what your God does. And so the prophets of Baal all decide, they pray, they cut themselves, they're doing all kinds of craziness to try to stir up their God to act on their behalf, and nothing happened. And Elijah is like, this is such a funny episode if you go and read this. He's like taunting them. He's like, is anybody home? Is your God deaf? What's going on with your God? And like he keeps kind of goading them into trying harder, and nothing happens. And so after a little while, Elijah's like, okay, I think you're done now. He's like, here's what we're going to do. And so he builds this big trench. He pours water all over his sacrifice, tons and tons of water in a time of drought and famine. He pours all this water on the sacrifice. He prays one short prayer to God, and boom, fire comes and consumes his sacrifice. It's this epic moment where God's people are reminded that there is one true God of Israel and he alone should be worshiped. It's this incredible, powerful mountaintop experience that Elijah the prophet has. Like, Elijah now should know God is epically on my side in any battle. There's nothing that I'll face and nothing that God's people will face that will ever be too big for our God. It's an absolute mountaintop experience. But the problem was, King Ahab didn't like Elijah, and King Ahab's wife was a woman named Jezebel. She liked Elijah even less. She hated him. She wanted him gone. She wanted Ahab to kill Elijah, and Ahab had kind of tried and failed, and so Jezebel's like, let me take matters into my own hands. Let me go ahead and take this out. This is kind of like in my house when I'm looking for something and I can't find it, and my wife is like, would you stop and let me just find it for you? That's kind of the moment here. And so Elijah decides when he hears of this to run away, to run from this experience after this mountaintop experience. As soon as he learns that Jezebel and Ahab are going to try to kill him, he decides that he's got to run from this experience. Can anyone else relate to that? Where you've had a credible encounter with God, where God has answered a prayer, done something amazing for you, and then the next hard thing that happens feels like you forget everything that God has just done. If you've never experienced that, watch out, because at some point in lifetime you will. I like to say we're fickle in a pickle. Yeah? A pickle is when you're in a situation that you can't get out of. It comes from baseball when someone's stuck between the bases. And what I've discovered over my life is that I'm very fickle when I'm in a pickle. That God is really great on the mountaintops, but when I start to experience some sort of attrition, some sorts of hardship, it's difficult for me to hold on to that thing. And that's exactly what happens to Elijah, that he gets fickle. And so here's what happens in 1 Kings 19. Elijah was afraid, and he runs for his life. And he came to Beersheba in Judah. This is an interesting little line. There's a lot packed in this one little line, but here's what I want to draw out for you. This is a really, really long way to run. Where Elijah started to where he ends up is about 100 miles. Any runners in the room? Good. Why do people do that to yourselves? Thank you. I like this church even better. Not one person. Oh, we've got one back there. But this guy runs 100 miles. Oh, we got another. I don't like to run anywhere. Running was always a punishment in every sport I ever played. You did something wrong, go run. Yeah? So Elijah runs about 100 miles to get away from this woman. And so here's what the scripture says, continuing. He left his servant there. And while he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness, so he goes to that desolate place, he came to a broom bush and sat down under it and prayed that he might die. This is an intense feeling. Like, I've prayed some hard prayers in my life, like, God, get me out of this, but I've never yet prayed, God, just kill me now. That's some hardcore kind of wilderness. He's in physical wilderness now, but he's also in a spiritual wilderness. And then he says these words that probably a lot of us have said before. I've had enough, Lord, he said. Take my life. I'm no better than my ancestors. Then he lay down under the bush and he fell asleep. Now, he might wanted to die just because he ran 100 miles, right? But more likely, he wants to die because he's tired of fighting. He's ready to give up. He's had enough. And I'm certain that in a group this size, at some point in your life, maybe even right now, you've come to a place where you're like, I have had enough. I'm ready to give up. Maybe you're a parent that's exhausted raising your kids. Maybe you're right there in the middle of a really difficult work situation, feeling like you are absolutely up against a wall and deadlines that there's no way you could possibly meet. Maybe it's financially. Maybe you feel like you're doing your best, and then the car breaks down. We just had this moment a couple weeks ago. We literally dropped a car off that just needed some minor maintenance, and when I got home, one of our other cars broke down on the way home. So we had to go get the other car that needed the minor maintenance to get home and take the car that actually needed to be fixed. This is just one day in the life, right? Or maybe your 2-year-old stuck a Lego up his nose. Yeah? Like, why does my kid do these things? And now you've got an emergency room bill to try to figure out how to get this thing out. Maybe you're saying, God, I've had enough. Lord, I can't do it anymore. I thought I was doing it all right, God. I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought we were good. Anyone else experience that? That's where Elijah's at. He had done everything right up until this point. Actually, nothing about the life of Elijah up until this point reveals he was anything other than faithful, doing exactly what God wanted him to do. And oftentimes we can have this narrative in our minds running through that if we do things right, we will avoid the wilderness. If we do things right, we will avoid the hardship. Anyone else believe that lie? That if we just worship God enough, we just pray enough, we just do all the right things, God, I'm serving, I'm doing whatever it is, that I will somehow avoid hardship and difficulty in my life. It's a challenge for many of us, and that's what Elijah is thinking. God had just used him to have this epic showdown with the king and calls on God's power. And then there's a drought as punishment to that evil king, and he demonstrates God's power over the other gods. Over and over again, this prophet experiences the protection of God. He experiences the provision of God. He knew the presence of God. And now he's running for life, and he feels like he's at the end of his rope, and he's tired. I don't know about that word and how it hits you, that word tired. Isn't that sometimes like the word that we use to just describe how we're feeling? It's like a way to sum up our overall experience of life. I'm tired. I'm tired of the grind. I'm tired of fighting. I'm tired of taking one step forward and 2 steps back. I'm tired of uncertainty. I'm tired of pain. I'm just tired. Henry Cloud, who's a Christian psychologist, says this: we often misdiagnose what our real need is. Most people are not tired, because if you were tired, you could just take a nap and that would solve your problem. You are not in need of physical rest as much as you are in need of spiritual replenishment. You're not just tired, you are spiritually depleted. And that's what is happening with Elijah, and that's what's happening for many of us when we get into these seasons of wilderness, where it's not just that we need lunch and a nap, but we need to experience God's provision in a way. We need Emmanuel. And maybe that is what God is wanting you to hear today. You're not just tired, you're not just overwhelmed, and it wouldn't get better if all of your situations were just solved and everything was easy. That actually what you need is an encounter with the very real presence of God. You need an intimate moment where you experience the grace and the goodness and the loving kindness of God, the mercy of God's presence. What you need is spiritual replenishment in the place of the wilderness. So if we move forward in the story, we see what God does. God doesn't preach a sermon to Elijah. He doesn't give him, here are your 5 points to a better life. Do you know that right now, self-help books are the highest selling kinds of books and have been for a long time, and they're only increasing. But do you know anybody who's genuinely happier in life because they've read a bunch of self-help books? It does not deliver on the promises that it wants to make, because what we ultimately need is something. Love how it talks about in Psalm 23 that the good shepherd restores my soul. Life hacks cannot restore your soul. Only God can do that. Notice here, as I'm about to say, God doesn't give Elijah a bunch of things to do. He doesn't challenge him on where his faith is. God tells him to eat and to rest in his presence. Here's what it says. At once, an angel touched him and said, "Get up and eat." He looked around, and there by his head was some bread baked over hot coals and a jar of water. And he ate and he drank and he laid down again. 1 Kings 19, 5-6. Don't miss this. Sometimes the most spiritual thing you can do is to rest in the presence of God. Rest in the presence of God. Not just rest. Not just take a nap, although that's fine. We need that. Not just eat a good meal, but to feast in the presence of God. To lay down your troubles in his presence. Sometimes the most spiritual thing you can do is to take a breather and let God restore your soul. I can remember this moment. My wife and I and our family, we were on a vacation a couple years ago, and we were in a season that was really tiring. We were feeling really burnt out. And we went on this vacation, and we were in the Dominican Republic. We'd never done anything like that before. Doesn't that sound nice right now? Sitting on the beach, just like negative temperatures, right? And it was a great week. We had fun. There were lots of really good moments, but there was one moment in particular where all of a sudden, all the fun that we had been having, the great food, the great environment, all of that was fine. But there was a moment, we had decided for a day we were going to rent this cabana that was on the beach. It was like a really great deal. It's like half price. It was like, we'll never be able to afford this again. Let's do it. And so we walked up to that cabana, and I can remember, man, it makes me emotional thinking about it, seeing my name, our family's name written on the cabana. And there was food and drink that was waiting there for us when we showed up. And I just felt this tangible sense that this was a gift from the Lord and that we were going to really rest in him today. And it wasn't, honestly, the food was the same, the drinks were the same, it was the same beach, but there was something about this moment and seeing our name, it felt like God was saying, I am doing this for you. Just be with me today. And that moment felt like there was a rest and a restoration that happened for us. And it wasn't just we were laying on the beach, it was that we felt God's presence as we were resting. That is what happens for Elijah in this moment. There's something that God is doing where it's more than just taking a nap. It's somehow sitting in the presence of God and letting him take care of you. Think again about Psalm 23. God prepares a table before me in the presence of my enemies. That's the beauty of Emmanuel. It's the beauty of a God with us. It's not just that he will quickly rescue us from the wilderness, but that in the wilderness, he is with us. That while, I love that psalm, that while my enemies are all around me, he has set up a feast before me in the presence of my enemies. That's what our Emmanuel can do. Verse 7 says this, then the angel of the Lord came back a second time and touched him and said, get up and eat, for the journey is too much for you. Listen to the kindness of God speaking through the angel of the Lord. This journey is too much for you. I see you've been working really hard. You're going to take another journey. It's too hard, and I need you to eat. So he got up and he ate and he drank. Strengthened by that food, he traveled for 40 days and 40 nights until he reached Horeb, the mountain of God. And there he went to the cave and spent the night. It's interesting. Notice that Elijah initially put himself in this position in the wilderness. So if you go back to where I started, remember he's on this mountaintop. He has this great, powerful experience with God where he conquers the prophets of Baal by God showing up, right? And all the while, there's already a threat on his life. But somehow, after that moment, Elijah, this fear sets in his heart and he decides he needs to run away from the problem. It's kind of mind-boggling when you think about it. This is the God who just started a spontaneous fire on the altar and causes rain to stop. He can take care of this evil queen, but something about Elijah is fearful, so he runs to the wilderness and he finds himself in this place because he chose to run to the wilderness. And I would say oftentimes in my life, the wildernesses that I have experienced are oftentimes things that I've run to. I put myself in that position. I've made choices along the way where I find myself like in this place of disorientation, not necessarily just because something happened to me, but because I responded to the hard things in life by running away from God rather than running to God. Does that make sense? Maybe you have experienced that too. But here's the interesting thing. The kindness of and the mercy of God is that he meets us in that wilderness. He doesn't abandon us and say, oh, too bad, Elijah, you're tired and you're burnt out. Fix it and come back. Actually, instead, he says, okay, Elijah, I want to reveal your real need. I'm sending you deeper into this wilderness now that you're here. It's interesting. He sends Elijah on this journey for 40 days and 40 nights. Does that sound familiar to anybody? Yeah? It's the time that reminds us of the Israelites wandering around in the wilderness for 40 years. And it's interesting, they go to Mount Horeb, which is just a different name for Mount Sinai. It's the place where Moses went and God's people waited for the covenant to receive the 10 commandments. He goes to the very cave that Moses himself was in when he asked to see a revelation of who God was. And God puts him in the cleft of the cave and passes by. It goes to that very place. God's saying, I'm going to push you further into this place so you can experience your deepest need in me. So he goes to this place because God knows that there's a deep need in his heart that only he can satisfy. So while he's there, here's what happens. The Lord appears to Elijah, and the word of the Lord came to him. What are you doing here, Elijah? It's interesting. God is the one who led him to go to that place. So God's not curious. When God asks you a question, it's not because he's confused about anything. Yeah? God's like, yeah, I don't know what to do, Elijah, you know? He's asking the question for your sake. Yeah? So that's what he's doing here with Elijah. And so it draws something out of Elijah. Elijah responds, and I think he does it with a pity party voice. Anyone ever talk to God at a pity party voice? Yeah? Kind of that whiny kind of voice? You're lying, some of you guys. Yeah? Like, you need to record your prayers. Because all of us at some point is like, God, what? Yeah? I had one of those moments even this morning. I'm like, really? Is this what we're doing today, God? Woke up immediately to frustration before I ever even stepped foot out of my bed this morning. Just something happened in our home. And I was like, really? We all oftentimes, when things get hard, we talk to God. When we feel like God's not answering our prayer, not doing what I want, when I want, we get that whiny voice. And so here's what Elijah says. I've been very zealous for the Lord God Almighty. Basically, I've been working hard for you, God. I've been doing all the right things. I'm trying to do good. You might even think to yourself, I do all the right things. I serve in hospitality. I even serve in the kids' ministry. Yeah. I sacrifice for you, Lord. That's what Elijah's saying. He says, the Israelites have rejected your covenant. They've torn down your altars and they've put your prophets to death with the sword. And I am the only one left. And now they're trying to kill me too. It's interesting because this actually isn't true. There are other prophets right now. But Elijah, in this place of brokenness, in this place of isolation, in this place of disorientation, feels this loneliness of God. It's just me and you have completely abandoned me. I've done everything I possibly could for you. This is Elijah's true wilderness. This is what is really in his heart. So I want you to see what God does next. God is going to meet him in his deepest need. He meets him in this moment of vulnerability and brings healing to the hurt. So in verse 11, the Lord said, "Go out and stand on the mountain in the presence of the Lord, for the Lord is about to pass by." Remind us again back when this happened for Moses earlier. Essentially what he's saying is, what you need right now, Elijah, is my presence. I am about to show up to you. Again, don't miss this. In the wilderness, your deepest need is going to become a gift when it drives you to depend on God. And so here's what happens in the story. Then a great and powerful wind tore the mountains apart. Can you imagine that? Tore the mountains apart, shattered the rocks before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. After the wind, there was an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. After the earthquake came fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire came a gentle whisper. And when Elijah heard it, he pulled his cloak over his face, and he went out and he stood at the mountain of the cave. It's interesting. Scholars don't know exactly what to do with the word that's translated here as gentle whisper. This is one translation. Others say something like deafening silence. There was a void of noise, but somehow in that void of noise, somehow in that definite silence, Elijah was able to discern that God was present with him in that moment. He experienced a nearness with God that was not in all of these other grand displays. By the way, all these other things, the earthquake, the fire, the rocks being torn, this is how God had shown up in the life of Israel before. We can hear great stories of God parting the seas. Elijah himself had just experienced the fire coming from heaven and consuming what was on the altar. There had been rocks where water had come out. There's over and over again, God had revealed himself in these grand displays of power. And I can imagine Elijah here in the cave going, "Okay, God, I'm ready for the big show. Let's do this thing. Show me your power." And instead of that, God says, no. I just want you to experience that I am near to you in this moment. Why is it that oftentimes this is our experience? That when life is so difficult and hard, when we experience that wilderness, it feels like God's voice is so quiet. Why is it that he is oftentimes gentle when we want him to be powerful? When he's in the speaking and the gentle whisper, when we want him to be loud and shouting? I think it's because God whispers because he's close. Because he doesn't want us to be just wowed with his power. But he wants us to experience the nearness of his presence like a gentle whisper. It's interesting, in the story, in the Gospels, when the shepherds come and see Jesus and they recognize who he is. The Bible says they were amazed at what they saw. And then they went and they told everybody. And so imagine that you're around and you got to hear about this Messiah that was born because of these shepherds who were amazed by it. They were wowed by it. But it's interesting, in the Gospel of Luke, it has this little line. It said, But Mary treasured and pondered all of these things in her heart. Mary had a completely different experience with Jesus than the shepherds did. The shepherds were wowed, they were awed, and they were like, "This is awesome, this is great." But Mary had an up-close and intimate experience with this baby boy who's going to be her Savior. And I have found throughout my life that the things that sustain us in the wilderness are not really the grand displays of power. They're not that God's shouting at us and things that we want him to shout at. Don't get me wrong, miracles are incredible. God has done wonderful things in my life, but I can go back to times in my life where I have felt this kind of deafening silence from God, but I knew he was near, and that is what got me through the wilderness, friends. God doesn't shout to get your attention. He whispers to draw you close. Someone has said, the devil shouts his lies, but God whispers his truth. What does he say? What are the kinds of things in that silence where that you hear in God's voice? What are those gentle whispers? It's things like, I will never leave you or forsake you. I've been with you every single moment, every single way, every single day. I love you more than you can imagine. When you hurt, I hurt. When you're in the valley, I am with you in the valley. When you're in the wilderness, I am with you in the wilderness, friends. This is what the wilderness is all about. Where we're drawn close, where what is in our heart, the thing that we really need gets drawn out to the surface because we have no one else and nothing to depend on. It's like that story I told at the beginning where all I could do is look for the light and try to follow that light to find my way out of the wilderness. That's what wilderness does for us. It focuses our attention to say, God, all I have to hold on to is you right here, and so I'm here, so show up in any way you possibly can. And if we're looking for those grand displays of power, oftentimes we will not find those things. I'm not saying God can't do those things or doesn't do those things, but most often it's in the silence where the needs of our heart are revealed and the heart of God is revealed. And guys, that's what this relationship with Jesus is all about. Our hearts being offered up to him, his heart being offered to us, and us walking through life together. Psalm 34:18 says this, the Lord is close to the brokenhearted, and he saves those who are crushed in spirit. Why does God whisper in the wilderness? Because he's close. Because he's near. Because he is Emmanuel. He is God with you. You will not always know, you won't know that until you have experienced seasons like this in your life. I've experienced more seasons like this than what I can count. If you walk with God long enough, you will wander into the wilderness. Sometimes because of the choices that you've made, sometimes because of nothing that you've done. I had a moment like this myself, and the band can come on up here. I was finishing my college years, and I was in a band. I played bass guitar, and I played in a metal band. Any metalheads in the room? Yeah? Okay, just one. Good. Let's rock on later. And my dream after graduating from college with a degree was to be a rock star. Go make that make sense. Yeah? That's what I wanted to do. God had been working in my heart, subtly drawing me back to him. I had walked away from him for a while, and I felt like, God, I want to surrender my life back to you. I want to serve you. And there were some things going on in this band and the things that we were doing that just were not consistent with being a follower of Jesus. But I knew that the other guys in the band, they had the same spiritual heritage, and so I tried really hard. I prayed, and I tried to influence them for the Lord and tried to shift things, and I started living a different lifestyle, different witness, so that maybe God could use this thing, and I didn't want to give up on this dream that I felt like God had, the thing that God wanted for us. And so I just kept pressing into it. And then it became pretty clear that it was going to be really difficult for this to work out. But I was still holding on to the dream. I had no plan. I had nothing to do. We were about to sign on to do this big tour, and there was going to be this whole thing, but it wasn't yet at the place where we could sustain a lifestyle doing this. It was like we were going to make a little bit of money and then have to go back and work at McDonald's or wherever again. And like, this was just what it was going to be. So one day my friends who were in the band came over. They told me they were coming to watch football, which I knew was suspicious because they never watched football. And I was like, this is some kind of weird thing. And they came over and they said, look, this isn't working out. You're done. We're kicking you out of the band. And in 1 minute, I lost my dream. I lost all my friends. I lost the love of my life up to that point was music. I lost it all. And I had no plan. There was nowhere else for me to go. I had no community outside of this group of people. And I was absolutely, utterly lost. I was in the wilderness. And I wish I could tell you, oh man, it was quick and I got out of it really quick. But I didn't. I spent night after night after night staying on my front porch of my house, looking up at the sky in Tennessee, feeling like I was staring up into the stars and to the clouds and asking God to show up and change their heart or change my heart. And I prayed prayers like Elijah prayed, God, I did everything you asked me to do. I'm giving my heart back over to you. God, we have big dreams. We have great opportunities in front of us. Lord, you can use this for your glory. I don't understand why we're here. And I remember sitting on my front porch, and it wasn't like God said anything, but yet he said everything. What happened in my heart as I sat on the front porch and stared into the sky and poured out my heart to God was all of a sudden I realized he was actually the only thing that I needed. That all these other dreams, all these other plans that I had, that none of them really mattered. They can all go away in an instant. But if I had the one who I was praying to for the rest of my life, that is really all I needed. And God began to shift and change my heart in that wilderness season. It was hard, it was long, but ultimately that is what led me to moving to Illinois to go to seminary. And that's what led me to become a pastor. And had I not gone through that wilderness season and experienced Emmanuel, God with us, I wouldn't be here today. So thank God for the wilderness, yeah? Right now, you might have a difficult time thanking God for the wilderness you're in, and that's okay. That's okay. It's okay to feel like, God, I want this to end, and call out to the Lord and ask him for rescue and redemption. But also know that until that day comes, what you need right now is not just a rescue from your wilderness. What you need is the very presence of God in your life. What you need is to know that when everything else is stripped away, he is all you have left and that he is enough. So today I want to pray that if you're in a wilderness season, you'll experience Emmanuel. You'll experience God with you. And then the worship team's going to lead you in a song again. And I pray that while you sing that song, the words of the song and the truth of it will impact your heart so that you will trust Jesus radically in this wilderness season. That your deepest need in this wilderness season is an incredible gift if it drives you to depend on